Thank you. I have to say, I'm still not at all used to people calling me Dean. And when somebody does that, I look around and go, who are you talking to? Which is the same reaction I had 25 years ago when I started teaching, and people said, oh, professor. And I would always look around and it's like, who in the world are you talking to? So I suppose I'll get used to it. How are we doing on volume? Is it okay? Okay. This seems a little loud to me, and that's all right. So I'll try to keep it down so I don't blow anybody away. I've been thinking a lot about leadership for some pretty obvious reasons. I've been dean of faculty for a month, so I've been testing out my theories in real life. And so when we get into our discussion a little bit later, I'd love to talk with you a little bit about sort of the reality check on all the theory as I've gone into the role of dean of faculty, which, for those of you who don't know, probably the practical job description is cat herder in chief. And so I don't know if you've seen the old EDS ads about herding cats, but that's my daily job description. We have 180 or so full-time faculty, and my job is to get them more or less going in the same direction at the same time. And it's a very interesting proposition. So we can talk about that a little bit later. But what I want to talk about today is some work I've been doing with founders and entrepreneurs. And a lot of this started as war stories, because entrepreneurs, if you go ask somebody who's founded a company, what was your biggest ethical dilemma, you'll get 10. And they're great stories, and they love to tell the stories. So I actually would encourage you to ask people who have founded businesses, what was it where were your pain points? And you'll get the first answer will always be around money. How did I get the resources together to do all of this thing? The next set of answers will be about some of the difficulties they faced keeping their personal selves intact as they went through to try and bring their passion to the marketplace. So let's start with what I think about when I think about leadership. And I'm putting some qualifiers on it. Sustainable, responsible business leadership. And I'm looking for the intersection of three things. The first is always my screen, and I think this reflects a little bit of my bias as a trained attorney. Is it legal? If you are making a decision that is illegal, it's probably not sustainable for the long haul. If you are making a decision that's illegal, it should be a consciously illegal decision. I think of Martin Luther King in the letter from Birmingham jail. There are occasions where you have the duty, the moral duty to disobey the law. That generally doesn't come up on a day-to-day business basis. So think about that. Use it as a screen. It's a lovely screen. And I've always said to my students, if you go to jail, I will get out the grade change card and change your grade to an F, because clearly you were not paying attention to the most fundamental lessons of business law. So we'll just start with that. The second question, of course, is does this make economic sense? And business decisions, on the whole, need to make economic sense. The difficulty in figuring out what makes economic sense is short-term versus long-term, because some things make a whole lot of short-term sense that don't make long-term sense, and externalities. Those of you who have had financial accounting know that a balance sheet is a set of decisions. What gets included in the idea of what does something cost is a judgment call. And there are things that are costs in a greater sense that never show up on a balance sheet. And I'll just give you, I think, a quick example of that. If I send a car out the door of a manufacturing plant, that's the end of what my balance sheets would consider as costs, right? The cost of producing the car, I think that's where we would say, okay, that ends, and now we can measure our profit, and it's somebody else's issue once it goes on from there. The whole idea of it's somebody else's issue once it goes out my door is an externality. What happens when that car wears out? Where does the metal go? Where does the glass go? Where does the rubber go? Where do all the different component parts go? Those would be nice examples of things that never show up on Ford Motor Company's balance sheet. We see them as externalities. And yet, if you're really thinking long-term, you may see costs associated with that don't fit into a standard accounting model. Okay, so put that in your thought pattern because it's something I'm thinking about. And then the third piece is it ethical? And one of the things that we'll address tonight is how do I know? And there are a number of pieces of this question of is it ethical? You're reading True North, I believe, and so that gives you some sense of how do I know whether I have an ethical problem with something. Where are my core values? What is my true north? And that's an appropriate question to ask, and then we'll do this in quite a bit more detail. And then I think there's a second piece which has to do with the role of trust in business, which is something that we've really lost sight of. Charles Handy wrote probably 15 years ago at this point that trust is at the core of capitalism. And without some level of trustworthiness, capitalism falls apart. I'm personally a big fan of capitalism, so I would prefer not to see it all fall apart. So I do think we need to act in a way that is trustworthy. And that might be one of my business core values. I'll see how I do when I'm actually deaning and trying to work this out in real practice. I do think that entrepreneurs have an opportunity to create an ethical business culture in ways that doesn't happen in larger organizations. And I'll give you some examples. I was looking at this earlier and thinking, it's really hard in a really large, well-established organization for any individual person to change, influence, lead a culture that is an ethical culture in the organization. There's a lot that gets in the way. And so I went out to do a little research and came up with this fellow, Joel Kurtzman, who's published a book that I actually think is rather interesting called The Common Purpose Organization. And he says you can identify some organizations by their common purpose, clearly articulated institutional values, and a really clear sense of we. And I thought, oh, clear sense of we, that's a really interesting idea. Is there a we and a they? Are the production workers we and the folks in the offices they? Or them? That would be better, right? Them. Or are we all we? And who has the job of creating this common culture and a collective sense of us? Maybe us is a better word, really, than we. Kurtzman uses we. And then to carry it out, there are lots of organizations that say they are purpose-driven organizations. We've got great mission statements, right? You've probably seen organizations with fabulous mission statements. Then carrying it out in actual decision-making doesn't necessarily happen. And it doesn't get reinforced in evaluating and rewarding employees. So there's a big step, or cliff, between saying what you're going to do and actually doing what you're going to do. What gets in the way, and this is, Kurtzman talks about this, the need to make your quarterly numbers. The bigger you get, the more established you get, the more you think you've got to make those quarterly numbers, especially in a recession. It becomes a real driver of decision-making that undercuts this sense of common purpose. The complexity of all of the moving parts. And there are, I'm going to give you 3 examples. I think how hard this is to do, and you'll see complexity of moving parts, I think. Disincentives to purpose-driven decision-making, and of course, the tendency towards rationalization. We all like to think we're doing the right thing, so we're very good at coming up with reasons why this was the right thing to do after the fact. And as I'm prone to say, denial ain't just a river in Egypt. Okay? So I think we can do that. So here are my 3 examples, and these are all relatively current examples. The Susan G. Komen Breast Cancer Foundation, an organization that I think is a terrific organization that has done a lot for raising money for breast cancer research. In 2010, they engaged in a campaign with KFC. And you could buy a bucket of chicken at KFC, and for every bucket of chicken that you bought, 50 cents would go to the Susan G. Komen Foundation. Now, this is an interesting strategy, right? And I will make you an argument that it's a nice example of undercutting a purpose-driven organization. Anybody have any health issues with KFC? Yeah, well, I didn't even go down that road. That's really good. I wasn't even thinking about that. Oh dear, that's really, really bad. But the KFC is certainly, now didn't they bring us the double down? Correct? And so are they contributing, and some people would argue that they are contributing to obesity and to poor nutrition and a variety of other sorts of ills, and a lot of the medical community is making a connection between the kind of high-fat diet / obesity and some of the cancers that affect women and men. The reasoning from Susan G. Komen was, but think about how much money we're going to raise doing this, and we're going to have pink buckets everywhere so everybody will be aware of breast cancer issues. All right? I'm not going to tell you right or wrong, and this is going to drive you nuts for the next hour because I'm not going to tell you right or wrong, but I'm going to suggest that when your organization gets really big, it gets hard to sustain your purpose, all right, and your values. Johnson & Johnson, and this is a nice example of the complexity of many moving parts. We all probably know the story of Johnson & Johnson and Tylenol in 1982. It's probably taught in every ethics, everything, as a business ethics paradigm for how corporations ought to respond. In the, I'm going to get the dates wrong, the 1990s and then the 2000s, McNeil Consumer Healthcare, which actually was the old Tylenol, the home of Tylenol in the Johnson & Johnson empire, they purchased Pfizer's over-the-counter drug business, got themselves sort of rebranded, took on a lot more products and a much bigger role at Johnson & Johnson. And the quality control problems began. And different managers ran that organization. Now, have you all seen the Johnson & Johnson Credo? Ah, this is something that probably ought to be on your list, to see the Johnson & Johnson Credo. Yeah. Is it a family company? No, that's SC Johnson. You're in the Johnsons, but it's the other one. The Credo is something that the founders of Johnson & Johnson put together a very long time ago, and it's a set of values that has created for that company a common purpose. And we believe that the first priority is to our customers, the nurses, the doctors, the mothers, the fathers, the children who use our products. Our second priority, and I may get the priorities wrong, the punchline's going to work here. Second priority is to our employees who deserve a safe place to work, fair wages, and conditions for advancement. Third priority is to our communities in which we live, and we are citizens of these communities and owe obligations. And the fourth priority is to our stockholders who deserve a fair rate of return. J&J has lived by that credo for decades, and it got lost with McNeil Consumer Health Products. It got lost to the point where, if I pulled this up, you would see the recalls of Zyrtec, of Tylenol, of Sudafed, of a whole variety of other things, of a plant being shut down. And in the earnings that Johnson & Johnson reported a couple of weeks ago, $650 million hit on earnings from product recalls in the fourth quarter of 2010. That's a big hit. Even for Johnson & Johnson, which is a big company, that's a big hit. The hit to the reputation is far more serious because you have to have a level of trust to buy brand name drugs. Why would I pay 3, 4, 5 times the price of a generic for a Zyrtec if it's no better than the generic? You have to want to believe that Johnson & Johnson is a company of integrity that puts their customers first. The story is still unfolding, by the way. A shareholder suit has been filed, and one of the concerns here is that there were loads of red flags. Okay, the FDA gave them a warning notice, and that McNeil ignored for 20 months. This is not the old Johnson & Johnson of the Tylenol 1982 story, where you had an immediate response to pull things off the market. Instead, we had managers who were worried about making their quarterly numbers. And you had division managers who came from the consumer brand side as opposed to the pharma side and had different sets of thinking about issues and priorities. So it's a very interesting example. My third example, of course, is one of my personal favorites, Countrywide Home Loans. And this is former CEO Angelo Mozilo in his testimony to the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission. Countrywide was one of the greatest companies in the history of this country and probably made more difference to society, to the integrity of our society, than any other company in the history of America. Okay? Denial ain't just a river in Egypt, and he might be the Hosni Mubarak of business. I'm not sure. Seeing the world in a very different way than reality would suggest perhaps he should be seeing the world. And this is one of the places where being a purpose-driven organization falls apart, is when the leadership of that organization gets invested for their own purposes. Angelo Mozilo probably became one of the poster boys for excessive executive compensation. And while the company was going down the tubes, he was extracting well over $100 million from the company for his own personal paycheck. And I don't know whether he really believed this to be true. He, in his emails to his senior managers, described the products as they were selling as toxic and said they would have horrible consequences to the American economy. So at the same time he's saying this, he's sending internal emails that say something else. The driver for this, the company decided from 2003 to 2008 that they wanted their market share to go up from 10% to 30%. And they would do whatever it took to get 30% market share, which they did. Okay, over the objections of their chief investment officer, who said, you're letting lending standards go to wherever they would go. Bad. Okay, and so there were objectors, there were red flags in that organization. And I think if I were that chief investment officer, I would have been terribly frustrated. It's a real example of how difficult it is to change the course of large organizations. Entrepreneurs get to do something very different. And this is one of the great parts about being an entrepreneur, is you get to set the tone right from the start. You get to decide what kind of a business you'd like to have, what kind of a purpose you'd like to have. So let's see. Oh, yeah, well, we'll just run right through there. Actually, we'll run right back over here. Okay, I have more slides than I possibly know what to do with. And actually, well, I'm going to back up just for a second because it reinforces my point about how hard it is for individuals to really live out your values sometimes in corporate organizations. KPMG, the big accounting firm, puts out occasionally an integrity survey. And they go out and talk to the Fortune 1000 corporations and run a survey for them. The most recent one is 2008 to 9, so this is really as everything is all going all to heck. 74% of the managers they surveyed personally observed or have firsthand knowledge of wrongdoing in their organizations. Wow, that's not a happy number. 46% say that those wrongdoings could cause a significant loss of public trust if discovered, and that number is much higher in the financial services business. Ooh, okay. Why does it happen? Do whatever it takes to meet your business targets. All right? Rewards are for results, not how we get there. We don't have the resources to meet our targets without cutting corners, and if we don't meet our targets, we're going to get fired. Those are interesting drivers of decisions, aren't they? And these are largely in organizations that have just gorgeous mission statements. Okay, the words are really all there. It's the actions that are really problematic. So, how do we go at this? Come over to this side for a minute. Oh, that was blinding. All right, come over to this side. I really struggle with this because I think that when each of us faces ethical dilemmas, you typically don't have a lot of time to decide what it is you're going to do. And I'm a fan of stalling for time. I'm a fan of all kinds of activities to give myself time to think about how I want to proceed. So I was considering this and I was thinking, what kind of a cute little structure can I make that might be helpful to people as they face ethical dilemmas? And you know I'm going to have a million examples. All right, that's where we're headed, just so we're all clear on a million examples coming this way, okay? The first, so I called it radar because that you can actually say it's a word. The first thing you have to do is to recognize that, in fact, there is a conflict. That's not always as easy as we think, is it? And one of the striking things, if you look at the financial crisis, one of the striking things is how often leaders of large financial services organizations didn't even see that there was a problem out there. Okay, they didn't recognize a dilemma at all. All right, so now let's ask the question first. What's a dilemma? Is that a good question? I think have you been asking this question for weeks at this point? What's a dilemma? Oh yeah, I think so. Okay, here's what I think a dilemma is. Okay, I think a dilemma is a situation where you have two or more right answers, all of which, because I'm using my legal screen, all of which are legal. Okay, and all of which require you to trade one set of values for another. All right, you with me? And of course, not to decide is to decide. Right? If you wimp out on your dilemma, you are making a decision actually about how you're going to proceed. So you don't really have an opt-out on a true dilemma. Okay? So how do I see that a dilemma exists? Okay, sometimes it stares you in the face. True? True. Sometimes it's not so obvious. And I don't entirely know the right answer to this question. One of the places that you can start, and particularly for the engineers, just as an example, there are almost always codes of professional responsibility and codes of conduct. And that's a good place to start recognizing ethical dilemmas. It's kind of a screen, in a way. It doesn't solve your problem, but it does tell you kind of what the minimum bar is for your behavior. And that's always a good place to start. I tell this story about coming up to Massachusetts, and I had to take the bar exam up here. I'd been admitted to it as an attorney in New York, and I got up here and I had to take the silly bar exam over again up here. And up here there was a multiple choice ethics test that went with the bar exam. I thought, well, this is interesting. Multiple choice ethics, well, you know, the answer to every question is it depends, right? So how in the world am I going to actually answer these questions? And I took the practice exams, and I practiced law in New York for a while at this point, and I flunked them miserably. I thought, what the heck is wrong with this, right? I'm an ethical person, I said. What is wrong? And the answer finally came to me, thankfully, so I could pass the test when I needed to, that they weren't looking for the right answer, they were looking for the minimum answer. Where's the line between getting in trouble and not getting in trouble? That was the multiple choice ethics test. That's what a code of professional responsibility does for you. Whether it's engineering or law or architecture or medicine, that's the line between where you get in trouble and where you don't get in trouble. It's not dispositive of each question, all right? But it's a good starting point. So what is the conflict of values? That's the best way I can think of to look at it. And the best way I can think of to get there is to think of others. Okay, grabbing all the goodies you can is not usually a good ethical prescription, right? It's a way of life for some people, but it's not a good ethical prescription. So I don't really have a total answer to this, but I think if you recognize conflicts and if you think about other people's perspectives on what you're doing, you will come to recognize dilemmas much more frequently. The next step, the A part, is analyze your interests and your possible solutions. This is classically what you think of when you think of doing ethical reasoning. You start by saying, who are the stakeholders in my decisions? Who is it that will be affected by what I do? And that's always a good thing to ask. And what are their interests in this particular issue? What are the alternatives and what are the consequences? All right? Does this sound like just critical thinking 101? I hope so, because basically that's pretty much what it is. It's critical thinking 101. Who are my stakeholders? What are their interests? What are the possible alternatives and the consequences of those alternatives? Here's where your ethical theories come into play. All right? What is your true north? All right? We're going to come to a decision on this, and we're going to use our ethical theories to help us get there. Each one of you is going to have your own way of looking at the ethical world. Some will say, what's my duty to others? Some would say, what if everybody did this? Or I did this for everybody. Have you heard this? Yeah, I thought so. Okay. Some would say, what's the greatest good for the greatest number? Right? Others would say, and I think I count myself on this one, what are my core values, core virtues? What are the things I'm working hardest at that are most important to me? Confucianism, I think, takes this tack. Aristotle took this tack. Am I getting it right? I think I'm getting it right? You should be nodding up and down and go, yes, you're getting it right, okay? Because I think I am getting it right. But what are your core personal values? What is your true north? All right? When we talk later, I can probably tell you how I've been testing some of mine for the last month, because it's been really, really interesting. Decide on your course of action, all right? Articulate your reasoning. I was going to say explain your answer, but that doesn't work for radar, so I had to put articulate your reasoning, okay? Because I think that when you explain your decisions to others, it helps you think through why you made them. And it's always a good idea to be able to make your decisions openly and explain them to others. You've probably had this experience where you've gone to other people and you've gotten no is the answer. I know you've had this. Everybody's had this experience, right? No is the answer. And even if you disagree with the answer, if you understand the reasons for that answer, it's a lot more palatable to take the no. Is fair enough? I think it's a good way of approaching things. And then often what we forget to do is reflect on the choices we've made. How did that actually turn out? Would I do it the same way again? And these are questions in the hustle and bustle of life that we often forget to ask ourselves. To sort of stop and say, well, geez, that was awful. You know, and this is how I dealt with it. Would I deal with that again the same way? Is there some other way I could maybe avoid this dilemma in the future? That's always a good thing to ask as well. Okay? So the founders, let's think about entrepreneurs for a minute or a half an hour, and the special challenges that they face, and challenges and opportunities. And I've categorized them. When you found a business, there's a personal identification with what that business is. If you're the founder of an entrepreneurial venture, it's your venture. It's your baby. You are emotionally attached to it. It's your idea. And so there is an immediacy to it that doesn't exist in larger organizations. So this is where I went out to collect war stories. And I collected, a lot of war stories. And I've kind of grouped them into 4 different categories, because these are things that I think they're not unique to entrepreneurs, but they are certainly a big concern of entrepreneurs in ways that is not necessarily the case, in ways that are not necessarily the case for people in larger organizations, all right? So the first is that you have a big idea. And when we think about entrepreneurial thought and action, at the core of that is, well, the first part is a big idea. The second part is action on your big idea. The second I've called the 500 hats of Bartholomew Cubbins, which has to do with the multiple roles that every founder plays in a new business. The third is life on a shoestring. You know, there's always this temptation to cut corners because you just don't have the resources to do it right. And then the fourth is the probability of failure, which we never like to talk about. We always like to say, entrepreneurs, they're smashing successes. All right, and we love to, success is the only, success is the only answer? I don't know, that kind of stuff. Wrong. Okay, many ventures fail. Many entrepreneurs, and if you go talk about the war stories with anybody, they'll say, and I started this business and it failed. All right, and then I started another one and it failed. What is the famous Thomas Edison thing? He's 10,000 attempts to make the light bulb, and he says, I just found out 9,999 why it didn't work. All right, and when you learn to ride a bicycle, you crashed it more than once, would be my guess. And the object here is, what do we learn when we fail? And can we fail in a way that we crash the bicycle so we can get back on? We don't wreck the whole bicycle. In other words, we just fall off and skin our knees, and it's painful and horrible, but we can get up and ride the thing again. All right, so those are my 4 basic dilemmas, and let's start with the big idea. All right, a couple of things that are unusual. One, I think, is this confluence of management and ownership. If you look at a Johnson & Johnson, if you look at a Countrywide Home Loans, if you look at, you pick IBM, the owners are the shareholders. The management it's not the same. You look at a startup, and the manager and the owner are typically the same person. And that's a real difference between the startup and the larger, more established organizations. Your business plan speaks the values of you, the founders. All right? In some cases, it's explicit, social entrepreneurship, where the business is designed around the very notion of solving a societal problem. I have lots and lots of examples of that, which I'm sure you already know. One of my personal favorites is Free Play Technologies. Do you ever heard of these guys? These guys are great. They looked around. They were in South Africa. They looked around and they said, one of the biggest issues is we'd love to bring light and cell phones and electricity to sub-Saharan Africa, but there's radio, that's the word I'm looking for, but there's no electricity. So how do we go about solving this problem? The answer was the crank radio, the crank flashlight. Now, have we all seen this? Yeah, sure. You can go to LL Bean or one of those places and buy one of these crank radios, all based on Free Play's technology. All right? Every time you go there, and my understanding is when you buy this from LL Beans, a little bit of it goes back to subsidize the social entrepreneurs in sub-Saharan Africa, which is way cool. And what's the significance of a radio for a village in sub-Saharan Africa? It's huge, right? It's a life-changing technology, and you don't necessarily have to have electricity. So that's a nice example of social entrepreneurship. The second kind of way people get passionate about going into business for themselves is they just want to do business differently. And I think Hewlett and Packard are probably my best example. When that business was founded literally in a garage in Palo Alto, Hewlett and Packard said, we have a passion for oscilloscopes, okay, but we really want to do an engineering business differently, with autonomy, with independence, with respect for our engineers, and allow them to be creative people. That's the HP way. And HP for a long time lived by the HP way. I think probably most people would say they lost it. Okay, just as we talked about this earlier, it's really hard to sustain this over the long haul. And when your organization gets really big and really complex, it's hard to sustain. And then, of course, there's the choice of products and services. So let me give you an example. Here is an energy drink called cocaine. All right, and I'm just a big fan of the whole energy drink thing. I think it's really interesting. I mean, I'm not. I wouldn't drink it, but I think it's a really interesting entrepreneurial story. And here's an example. First of all, I suspect they have a bit of a trademark problem with Coca-Cola in terms of the color and the font and the white powder that it looks like on their cans, right? Yeah, sigh. And this is one of these drinks that has a lot of alcohol. No, it doesn't have the alcohol. It just has the caffeine and the taurine and the guarana in it, all right? So it doesn't have the alcohol. You have to add that yourself, I guess. But in any event, the drink, it came to the founder during a brainstorming session at 1 o'clock in the morning. It's an energy drink. It's a fun name. As soon as people look at the can, they smile. They wanted to make a beverage that would send a sensation to the mouth. It's a fruity atomic fireball drink. It is almost entirely marketed on MySpace and Facebook. Who's their target market? Yeah, you and people who are younger than you. I mean, heck, if it's on MySpace, it's high school kids, isn't it? Thank goodness. You know, I feel much better for that, okay? But what I would suggest to you is that this is a statement, just this idea is a statement about the values of the founders of this business, about what matters to them most, okay? And I will say that Jamie Kirby was really quite explicit about it, and I forget which magazine asked him about it. All I have to do is look at the orders coming in, and I just laugh at the whole thing. As long as we sell drinks, I really don't care. So at least he was pretty straightforward about his values with this. All right, so it's a nice example of the idea, the big idea, expressing the values of the founders. Again, I won't tell you it's right or wrong. I'll just lay it out there. And of course, I had to include this one, right? So Four Loko. Interesting. I gave you a little timeline of the Four Loko, and then I'll tell you the socially responsible part of the story at the end. So 3 Ohio State students created this drink in 2005 because they saw people taking energy drinks at frat parties and adding alcohol to them. So they said, oh, we can do that. And they did it, all right? And so alcohol, caffeine, taurine, and guarana are the 4 ingredients, and so that's the 4 in Four Loko, all right? So what does this business plan and big idea say about the values of the 3 frat brothers from Ohio State? Not that I'm picking on Ohio State. It's a perfectly fine institution. It does say something, doesn't it? Just the idea itself, that somebody says, wow, this is a great idea for a business. Okay, loads of alcohol, loads of caffeine, awesome, this is going to be great. Okay, and the idea, they're making a value judgment and they're expressing their values. They start their sales in 2006. They had a sort of a viral marketing thing, and the slogan was horny, hyper, and happy. Okay, which was, I believe, how this was known for a number of years. So I'm not even going to ask what that says, but we'll just let that go. By 2008, it's available in 46 states and Europe, and people are starting to die. And, you know, sad but true, people are drinking this and they're dying. The double effect of the caffeine and alcohol makes people not... and they're fruit, like bubblegum type tastes to it. So it's really sweet. So it masks the effect of all of this. I have also heard this hangover in a can is... Was that another expression of it? What? Blackout. Blackout in a can. Yeah, okay. And these are 23-ounce cans, so they're not the same size as a typical energy drink either. You're doubling or tripling the size of a Red Bull, for example, with all of this. So I think there are messages, not very subtle, about the values of the founders in this big idea. 2009, the FDA investigation begins. I think you probably know I forgot to put 2010 down there. Apparently in the summer of 2010, Four Loko became a rap sensation. And I actually found top 10 Four Loko rap songs from the summer of 2010 for the Village Voice and one of their blogs. So apparently it became this sort of cultural phenomenon in a way that resulted in many more people dying from drinking this. And if you talk to folks who ran college health services in the fall of 2010, they would tell you that the infirmaries were full of Four Loko drunken students, alcohol poisoned students, in ways that had never happened. Never happened. So it's really sort of interesting. So ultimately, of course, we go back to another business flop story with all of this. The FDA made them take the alcohol out of the energy beverage. They are selling it, but I don't know anybody who's buying it. We'll just sort of put it that way. And most, or virtually all of the Four Loko that has the alcohol in it has been recycled into ethanol to be used in cars as fuel. So I don't know what that tells you about those of you who drank it, but we'll just sort of let that go without further comment. Here's another one, a big idea, the Snoop Stick. Okay, oh, got a great name, right? The Snoop Stick is, as you can see, a little thumb drive. Actually, I'll just give you, let's see if I can give you the video explanation of this. Let's see if we can find no, I can't find it. I'm just going to come up here and do this the old-fashioned way. There it is. Let's see. Oh, we're not on the internet. Okay, I can't do it. All right, never mind. The big idea of this is it's a thumb drive, and it's a form of net nanny. So you buy it, you put it in your kid's computer, okay, and then you pull it out. It installs a little piece of spyware on your kid's computer, and then you pull it out, and you can go anywhere in the world and watch what your kid is doing on their computer. Oh yeah. Okay, that's why it's the Snoop Stick, all right? And it's interesting because you can see a legitimate use for this in terms of parental issues with their kids on the internet. You can see what they're doing. You can send them a message. So don't be going to that site, all right? And or you can shut down the computer remotely. So yes, I'm serious. And you could go to a store and buy this product today. Where? And this is, what? This bothers you a little bit. Yeah, okay. But it's an interesting statement about, again, the values of the folks behind the product. You give it the name the Snoop Stick. I think you're encouraging people to do stuff with this that probably is not such a good idea. Yeah, like Snoop, exactly. My first reaction, of course, is can you say DIVORCE? Right? I mean, I would see this as totally being an instrument of familial destruction in divorce cases everywhere. I also am looking at this as like trade show theft. This is very easy to have an ongoing, yeah. And so there may be one really maybe decent purpose. All right, I talked about this in a room full of French executives one day, and the whole class, we were supposed to be teaching this class in English, and the whole class just burst into French. It's like, just couldn't stand it. I mean, these were all people in their 40s. It's like, no parent should do this to their children. They really strongly held feelings about the whole thing. But it's a nice example of the big idea, okay? So that's a good start. Now let's talk about some of our conflicts. So you may remember the Dr. Seuss story, The 500 Hats of Bartholomew Cubbins. If you haven't read it, it's like all Dr. Seuss stories. It's totally worth reading. And I had not realized that it was a story of entrepreneurship and family business. But Bartholomew Cubbins is actually selling cranberries to aid the family's cranberry business. And he's supposed to remove his hat. And every time he removes his hat, there's another hat underneath it. And that is very much the entrepreneur's story. Every founder is wearing 500 hats. You're the creative genius. You may be the only employee. You are the boss. You are a board member, you're an investor, you're trying to sell your business to your suppliers, to your customers, to your investors, to your board, potentially to your employees. You're wearing all these hats, and guess what? They conflict. All right? So in a way that you don't see in a larger organization, founders have these real, I don't know what to call them, really present conflicts of interest that you don't see elsewhere. And so let me give you an example, because this is something that larger organizations take care of. Babson College has a policy about all of this stuff. and which I do believe we do. I believe that's correct. And larger organizations set out policies about accepting gifts, about travel, about all kinds of stuff. And this is a true story. The names have been disguised to change the guilt, to what, protect the guilty, something like that, protect the innocent, it's supposed to be. You're the chief technology officer of a company that's buying 10 million euros. You can tell I use this with the French guys. 10 million euros of servers a year. Your vendor has offered to fly you to the World Cup finals, pay for a nice hotel room, wine and dine you, get you the tickets to the games. Your company, because it's young, has no policy. Because wouldn't that be typical of a startup? Sure, now I made a bigger company example than a startup here, but it would be typical. You wouldn't have thought of this necessarily. Here come your vendors offering to wine and dine you, send you to the Super Bowl, right? Send you to the NBA All-Star game. It's not at all uncommon, is it? And there's some level of World Cup on one end of the spectrum, let me buy you a cup of coffee on the other end of the spectrum, where there's a judgment call that occurs along this entire spectrum of what do I take and what do I not take. And if you have no policy, here's your 500 hats question. You have lots of conflicts of interest. Is this coming to me because I'm in my corporate capacity or my personal capacity? Does this offer belong to the company or does it belong to me? What should I do with this? So first question is, do you accept it? The trip to the World Cup. You want to, right? You want to badly accept this, don't you? As most people, you pick whatever event works for you, for the Super Bowl of whatever your given passion is, all right? But typically you say, wow, cool. I will tell you, a book publisher came to me, a textbook publisher, and said, Carolyn, we will fly you and a friend to Las Vegas for 3 days. And we're going to have a seminar on textbook publishing for the future. And that seminar will last a couple of hours, and then we'll put you up in a lovely hotel and give you some, seed money for gambling for the weekend. All right, so I'm not even in entrepreneurial capacity. Should I take this trip to Vegas? By the way, it just got offered to me again last fall from a textbook publisher. Who are the stakeholders? Let's run through the radar analysis with this, shall we? Is there an ethical dilemma? Yeah, okay. Who are the stakeholders? Well, yeah, Babson is one. How about every person in this room is another one? You buy textbooks. Are you happy with the price? Are the trips to Vegas free, or do they get included in the price? They totally get included in the price, don't they? Okay. Let's see. Any other stakeholders in this? The authors of the book, many of whom are my friends in a professional context. Okay, so there's another set of stakeholders over there. What? The bookstores. Absolutely. Right? That's another stakeholder in all of this. What? So we have a few that we've been able to identify. Do you see the conflicts? Yes. Is there a way for me to make a reasoned decision about this? Sure. You know what you think. I suspect you know what my answer was to this question. No. No. Can't do that. Okay. And I said no again last fall. I said, I'm much more interested in keeping the price of textbooks down than in a weekend junket to Vegas. Even though, what the heck, I'd love to go to Vegas. Why not? Right? You're going tomorrow. Yeah, so there you go. Okay. And I'm not asking who's paying for the trip either. Although you're going to be paying because you're going to go see Barry Manilow, and that'll be so yeah, you're so excited. Okay. So in any event, it is an ethical problem in and of itself. Absolutely. So what should my CTO do? Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying it's ethical, because it certainly could be unethical.
Yeah.
There's no denying that. But, they are already your vendor.
Yep.
If your goal is to build a closer, longer-standing
Yep.
relationship, there could be a real purpose that wouldn't be unethical behind it.
True.
Obviously, it depends on a lot of
Yeah. I mean, certainly the vendors have interest in building this relationship, right? And keeping their customers, and actually, what's in it for them is that you'll keep being their customer, right? And that's actually legitimate from the vendor's point of view, right? What's in it for the company? We know what's in it for me, right? The CTO, yeah.
I think it hurts the company because that brings up the cost of those servers.
Well, that would be a good question to ask, right? Is what's the impact on cost? Okay? I'll tell you what they did, because I think it's nice to always get some kind of answers. I promised I wasn't going to do that, and now I'm going to do that and tell you what they did. What they actually did was they said, this belongs to the company, not to any individual person. And we will accept this trip to the World Cup, but we're accepting it in the name of the company, and we get to choose who goes. So the CEO of the company said, we're going to use this to incentivize our own employees for their good work on behalf of the company. How's that for an interesting approach to all of this? It's a little bit, when you do that analysis and you think about the alternatives and the consequences down the road, that's where you get to get creative and work your way out of this ethical dilemma box. Yeah.
Did you know if they talked about developing a policy after that?
Yeah, they sure did. Yeah, they sure did. This was just the first instance where it came up. And what was really interesting is they decided to do this with all of the stuff that came to them. So, I have a couple of tickets to the Red Sox game. First person to call for them gets them. They arrived with a variety of policies for the goodies that came to them. I will tell you that the CTO discovered that he could save the company 20% the next year on the servers. Okay, by actually bidding it out. That loyalty piece really worked with the old CTO. And when the new CTO came in, he said, we're bidding out these servers, and they saved 20% on the whole process, which tells you that approach worked. And, we look around and we see the parties and we see the box at the Red Sox game. This is really common, isn't it, to see this in business? And you always need to be asking yourself, where's the line? What is it that somebody's looking for? And am I approaching this in a way that's really constructive? Again, I think founders see this in a more direct way. You see this in a much more direct way in a startup than you do in a larger organization, although you notice I gave a little example about the whole corporate jets bit with the CEO. So, yeah.
So I have a question. Assuming that you're a private company, not a government thing,
yep.
and that you are of high enough ethical standard that you're going to make an educated decision that you think is the best,
mm-hmm.
What's wrong with going, say, to the World Cup? If you're not going to buy from them anyway,
mm-hmm.
what do you care if you piss them off? If they're your vendor,
right.
You're going to keep buying from them anyway, you're going to do that. And if you're not, what's wrong with letting multiple companies court you? You can only choose one.
Well, that's one of the approaches that you could take. That's in there is no right or wrong answer to this question. That's where's your true north, right? What are the values that drive your decision? Because I think whatever decision you make, you're trading off sets of values. That's what makes this a nice dilemma. There's probably more than one right answer to this, and every decision, every path that you take is trading off one set of values for another. Okay? So there's some cool stuff. This, for me, by the way, has been a huge issue over the last 4 or 5 weeks, because I've been at Babson for 25 years. Now I've taken on a new role, and I'm faced potentially with, I'm just working through all the annual evaluations. So I'm now faced with saying to people who have been my friends for 25 years, you really didn't cut it this year. And that's a really interesting place to be that we'll talk about a little bit later. It's very interesting. So here's my third one, because I'm conscious of the interest of time here. Living on a shoestring. Every founder, pretty much, has to stretch their resources to the max. And the temptation is always there to cut some corners to get where you need to go. One of the real problems with being an entrepreneur and doing a startup is finding your first customer. All right? And in order to find your first customer, you have to appear established. Often you have to appear established, because who's going to want to sell to the newbie, right? So you have to sort of look a little more legit than perhaps you are at that stage of your this is like finding your first job, isn't it? It's not really all that different. You have to look very legit, polished, mature, professional, right? And hopefully you have the resources. When I went to my first law firm job, I interviewed in the winter, and I didn't have a winter coat. All right, I had my old icky ski jacket that I wore to law school, and there I was going down to Rockefeller Center, and I thought, this is not polished and professional. This is really bad. And so I went in February with no coat, on the subway across Midtown Manhattan. I was actually really cold. I will tell you, I was really cold. Got to the end of this wonderful interview, and the partner who was showing me out said, "Oh, let me help you with your coat." I'm like, no, that's really okay. And how do you present yourself as done? is ready for prime time, when perhaps you're a couple of steps short of really being ready for prime time. I worked really hard to find some gracious way to say, no, really, it's okay, you don't have to help me with my coat. And I finally had to resort to, I'm sort of a hardy girl from the Midwest, so I don't need no stinking coat. And that was my end game on that one. It worked. They actually ended up giving me the job. So, and I don't know if that was the reason or something else, but I finally had to give it up. So here's a typical problem. You're opening up a consulting business. You have a potential. You got a hot lead. So here comes your first potential customer, and of course they want to visit your office. All right. So now you don't want to be, too palatial or established, but you certainly want to look like you actually are not doing this in your pajamas out of your mother's basement. All right. So somehow you got to come to some middle ground on looking established and ready for prime time. You have a little office, you have no furniture, no employees, no real business, so you go down to the Staples or one of those places and you buy some office furniture on your credit card with a 30-day return policy, okay? And so if it just doesn't work, I'll just take the furniture back, all right? And we'll just use it for the visit and then we can take it back. You bring your friends in, you program your computers to call the phones so it looks busy. And you bring your friends in to come to the office and look busy, so you put them with some computers or something. It's like beer later, is kind of how you hire your friends to do all of this. So what do you think? Is that an acceptable? You see my ethical dilemma with this? If I do it, I'm creating a false impression. It's a false impression that does benefit what I need to have happen here, right? What happens if that client comes back next month or next week? What a tangled web we weave, when at first we do deceive, or something like that, right? You can help me with the original quote on that, but I think that's just about right. This is a really interesting problem, isn't it? Could you see doing either way? Could you see that there's more than one right answer, or maybe no right answer to this question? You don't do anything, you very well might not get that client, right? Yeah. Right. We're a startup. Dude, we're a startup, right? Yeah, they might very well not hire you. Yeah. On the other hand, do we have a hidden ethical dilemma in here? We have a second one that's in here, don't we? Speaking of R and radar. It's the return policy. Yeah, right. This is like this is like buying a dress to wear it to a party and taking it back the next day. Isn't it? Yeah, what? So, half the room wouldn't know what that example was even about, but that's not the purpose of the return policy. Is it all right to take advantage of that return policy for your startup? You see how I'm stretching my resources and living on a shoestring?
What about if you present it to the client and you meet in a neutral location?
Oh, we tried that. Yeah. Oh, I'm totally with you on this first line of attack, all right, we'll come to your office. Let's find another location. I'm all over that, but the client says, no. We want to see your office. Probably they're doing their due diligence on you, okay? So that would be one reason why they might want to come. Let's talk another quick one here. This is a true story. This is a fellow who had a startup. He wanted to have kiosks for cell phone service. So, in the malls, you'd put these kiosks and sell cell phones and cell phone plans. And he was just really having a very hard time getting the leasing agent to take his calls. He always got stuck at the secretary for the leasing agent. And he was really, really frustrated. And the leasing agent really kind of didn't necessarily want to rent to these guys because they didn't have a track record. All right? So one day he calls up and he gets the secretary to tell him this is his doctor, it's a family emergency. Okay? I wish this was not a true story, but it is a true story. My source is, Inc. magazine. And so this fellow, this is his true story, and he says, you got to do whatever you got to do. First rule of being an entrepreneur is to break all the rules. Okay? And so he did all of this, and he got to make his pitch to rent the space. Would you do this? Where's your true north? I think that's a good question to ask here, isn't it? Okay. It might not pass the legal screen, and it certainly pushes it at a minimum. I have an ethical problem on so many levels with this, because what if everybody did this? We'll start with that. What's my duty to others, right? What are my virtues of honesty right? I could go at this from any number of different directions. And what's interesting, and here's my Aristotelian point, okay, that excellence is a habit, all right, and all of our virtues are habits. And if you want to be a courageous person, you do courageous things. If you want to be an honest person, you do honest things. And somebody who lies becomes a liar over time, right? Down here on the bottom, whether you really can't see it, is the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, litigation release for this guy being convicted for insider trading a couple of years later. All right, if you cheat on one level of your life, are you going to be tempted to cheat on, are you going to be a cheater if you do cheating things? Ultimately, yes, you are. I mean, everybody makes mistakes, but if it becomes a pattern, then it becomes who you are. I think Aristotle would say that, something like that, right? Okay, let's crash the bicycle, because I'm unconscious, I've lost my time, so we'll crash the bicycle, and we'll do it fairly quickly. Here is one of the most difficult things, because it is extremely difficult to walk away from a business that's your passion. Okay, it is just tough to do this. People get caught in the trappings of success all the time. The money, the plane, the lifestyle, and that clouds their judgment. This is Angelo Mozilo, isn't it? On a much larger level. He got trapped by the trappings of success. The money became, the money, the mansions, the boats, the planes became more important than the substance of what was going on underneath. And to keep that, he cut some corners that he shouldn't cut, okay? Does the failure of the business reflect the personal failure of the entrepreneur? All right, my solution, and the solution of the folks that I've talked to, and I'm not going to go too far down this road, but I've talked to a number of people who have been serial entrepreneurs in the sense of taking high-risk startups, failing with 2 or 3 or 4 of them before they finally hit one that works. And what they would tell you is you have to be able to walk away. And one person described this to me as you've got to have your shoes on and be willing to walk away and crash that bicycle for a bunch of reasons. And I'll give you a couple of quick examples. This is a really nice quick example because this is sadly a true story. Okay, this is a venture capital financed startup in bioinformatics. And they had a term sheet, which is the initial contract for a funding round. It had no contingencies in it. All right, so one of the ways of looking at this problem is to say venture capitalists are big boys and girls, and if they made this mistake by not putting anything in their contract that would give them an out, then there's no obligation on the part of the startup to do anything to create that out. Okay? The day before the deal is supposed to close, you're actually going to get your money. There's a possum walking by outside. That's sort of interesting. Little nature going on over here in the corner. At least it's not a skunk. So the day before, you get a call from a major potential customer that says no to the biggest long-term deal in your pipeline. Okay? Moral of the story is don't answer your phone the day before your VC deal is supposed to close. I think that's the moral of the story. But now you know. And you're pretty sure that if you tell your investors about this cancellation, that they will walk away from your funding round. Okay? Kill the deal and probably kill your company. Okay? If you don't say anything, those are your options, aren't they? I can either say something or not say something. That's fairly binary. Do I have a dilemma? Yeah, I'll get the funding, but then I might not have the customers. I won't have the customer that we thought we were going to have. All right? What's the course that you take? Haha, yeah.
There's a difference between the short term and the long term.
Yeah.
You could take the money now.
Yep.
Once they see that you failed and you lied about it, you'll never get funding again from any other VC.
That's, that whole issue of trust and reputation, the VC community is very small, nationwide. It's the same group of people. If you treat them well, are you improving the odds that on your next startup they'll come back and they say, oh, this guy was totally forthcoming with us, so we should fund it? Maybe. Right? You don't know. It's a very much unknown, isn't it, at this stage? If you treat them badly, you know you have a problem the next time around, right? So that's where you've headed. Yeah. No, and that's why I put no contingencies on the deal. I couldn't believe it. When I got told about this, the term sheet, I thought, well, that was dumb. What was the VC company thinking when they didn't put any contingencies in there? But they didn't. So you actually have a legal right not to tell them, which is sort of amazing. So it's kind of interesting, isn't it? I can tell you what actually happened. Again, I said I wasn't going to do it, but I'm going to tell you anyway. They told the VCs, okay? The VCs pulled out. The company went bankrupt. All right, so there was an immediate short-term consequence to this particular deal. The entrepreneurs came back 6 months later with a new idea, went back to the same VCs. The VCs said, we'll happily fund this. It's a great idea. All right, it's a small community. It ended out, that's the short-term, long-term issue. It ended up working out really well for them in the long term, as awful as it was in the short term. So what's your passion? What's your who are your stakeholders? What is success? I think those are sort of the key questions that will help you drive how you decide what you're going to do. And so I hope that you've seen some nice entrepreneurial dilemmas. There's Hewlett & Packard's garage, because I just had to put that in there someplace, all right? That's the actual garage, which HP a couple of years ago bought back for some ungodly amount of money to set up as a museum to Bill and Dave, which they did. But, you know, it's so interesting. I hope you've seen some of these dilemmas and some ways of thinking about this for your own lives. And we'll just stop there, because we'll have questions in about 15 minutes, right, Len? Okay, thank you.